Hey friends, welcome back to the final installment of our DM's Guide to Vecna, Eve of Ruin. Today we're going to be covering chapters 9 through 11, the grand finale of this pretty grand story that runs all the way across the multiverse. So let's dive right into it with chapter 9. This chapter's beginnings could be fairly fragile, depending on how you've portrayed the Wizards 3, how suspicious your players are, and of course how many spoilers your players have gotten into on the internet. The offered options to try and talk it into going the right way aren't awful, but they don't cover the gamut of possible options that are out there, which admittedly are so broad that no published adventure really could. One plausible option, however, that I think is reasonably likely is the unwillingness of the party to let the Rod of Seven Parts out of their sight under any circumstances. With the other two powerful wizards probably recovered from wish sickness by now, and the party itself, there's pretty much no way that the doppelganger is going to get their way in the scene that follows. Potentially you could do something like trying to attack them while they're asleep and steal it away from them, but if you have the opportunity to still have trust of any sort within the group, I'd probably have each member of the Wizards 3 take the staff in person with them right there to examine it and to study and to cast spells upon it, trying to use the rod to determine where Vecna is. And then when the imposter does, they throw something through the portal and leap in after it. The portal collapses behind them and goes into a state of flux and won't recover from whatever it was that was done to it for, say, an hour. This gives time to set up the next chapter, as well as an opportunity for the group to rest, recover, and figure out what's going on, just in case there was some kind of a kerfuffle that happened during that period of time. The other problem in this chapter is that during the tracking segment, there's no acceptable fail state for the tracking of the disappeared imposter. If we get there and the group can't manage to pick up the trail of their betrayer, then we need some way to move the story forward. I'd consider having the remaining wizards too be able to figure out roughly the plan of what's going on and be able to research and locate the knowledge of where Miska is hidden. With a simple sending spell, they can transfer that knowledge to the group, but I would try to find a way to impose a loss of time that has some kind of impact that you can foreshadow and show to the group in the next scenario. Maybe increasing the danger level that Miska puts out as he's a little bit closer to being freed, or perhaps adding reinforcements on the betrayer's side. Chapter 10 has a lot going on, but the first thing that stood out to me was that as I read through it, the winds of pandemonium were mentioned frequently and yet never defined. Chapter 2 of the Dungeon Master's Guide includes a section on the rules and some optional rules for the maddening winds of pandemonium, and I would recommend using both. The maps in this section feel like they were attacked by word count. There's only room for so many places in this location with the 3 different detailed areas, and so they could only include so many rooms on the maps. It's kind of frustrating and a little bit lame, mostly because all 3 of these locations are particularly interesting, evocative, and awesome, and have some great scene setting, and so it'd be kind of nice if the maps matched up. The only map that has any real color and flair to it is actually a really boring map in terms of how you might fight on it, and so the battle that takes place there in order to introduce the Spyder Fiends is made lackluster because the battlefield is rather boring. Personally, I will probably look for a different option that places the encounter with these Spyder Fiends crawling out of a massive spider titan up against the ledge that leads down to the rest of the adventure, so that there's a nice handy hundreds of foot drop to terrify people with and drag them in spider webbing towards the edge to toss them over or to push their foes off. The fiends themselves are relatively simple for being such a late inclusion at such a high level campaign, but they do have the potential for some fun encounters. It's a great way to tell the group what they might be facing that is a little outside of their usual experience. I also liked how they introduced Vaeve at the end of the first battle, where she can join in to establish her as a friendly ally instead of an opponent, which might not necessarily be the kind of assumption that you would normally make when you are going up against spider fiendish creatures in a battle between the forces of a wolf spider and a queen of demonic spiders. I appreciated the fact that the adventure here acknowledged that 2 of the 3 locations here were not vital vital to the progression of the story. And so the party could go in any of these different directions and could essentially make some of the other locations useless in the process. Vaeve's role here is pivotal, and you want to make sure that you're foreshadowing what might happen depending upon where the group goes, so they realize that it might be in their best interests to hit all three locations in order to limit the influence of the generals that are left behind in the final battle. I would try to find ways to involve those major parties in the final battle if they're left intact, and so that a run through the citadel down below, or if you haven't taken care of the betrayer, might involve him showing up at the final stage. Find ways to foreshadow it to your group so that they can make an informed choice, and so they can experience all of this awesome chapter. A question about the future of D&D in 2024 popped up in Area X1. There's treasure there worth 360,000 gold pieces, 45,000 gold piece per object for 8 different objects, when the DMG in 2014 only includes options for art up to 75,000 gold in value. Are we going to be seeing a rebalancing of the costs and values of items in Dungeons & Dragons in this next edition? Not edition, whatever they want to call it. Later on in Y5, there's also an inclusion of a casual 750,000 gold worth of treasure in opals, which definitely gives me some hope that when they do include a price list for the various magic items in the game, that they're going to be including them on the higher side in order to balance things out a little bit. We can hope. Camlash includes a change to fiends with teleport that I've been doing in my own games for quite some time. It's written very similar to how a Nikoloth works according to the Dungeon Master's Guide. By allowing Camlash to use their teleport action as part of their multi-attack at the cost of some offense, you can create a skirmisher feel on a very potent foe while also still giving a reason for them to want to be able to drop in, stay there up close and personal, and wail away with both attacks every round. It makes the creature much more potent and more interesting, and makes the battlefield a more mobile and movable place instead of just a straight up tank and spank. Most other fiends that have been written out have included this option only as an action, which has pretty much made it not quite useless, but close enough to in combat. Unfortunately, Camlash's ability to teleport around as part of her multi-attack isn't going to be very interesting in a boring battlefield that's essentially a wide open room with no allies or anything of interest. When you cut down the tower, it still gives a full minute for everybody to escape the tiny little space, meaning that there's pretty much no risk of that being a useful or interesting situation anyway. Which kind of sucks, because I think that the idea of weaponizing a tower against your opponents is pretty awesome. And I would be amazed if your players weren't excited by the possibility themselves. Foreshadow like crazy the tower's perfect position to be dropped down upon the ruinous citadel below, and make it a part of Camlash's plan instead of just the player's option. She's just waiting for the right moment to let it drop, and when the characters arrive, well, then the baller needs to kick it into the next gear. She, after all, can easily teleport away and get safe, but can't these upstart adventurers? Have her, instead of attacking your group, be racing around, destroying these webs. And when she destroys the 6th one, the tower begins to fall. Setting the timing on how long it takes for the tower to fall is perhaps the hardest part here. But we're talking 19th level adventurers by this point, who have a ton of tricks up their sleeves. And many of them could easily survive the 20d6 of damage of bludgeoning rocks smashing down upon them as the tower falls away down off the cliffside. Nevertheless, setting this timing can be a little bit of a tough one. What I would probably do is set it for initiative 0 of the round following the destruction of the 6th and final web. And I would announce it quite plainly to everybody that that was when it was going to fall, giving everybody in the group 1 full round, and perhaps some of them 2 rounds, in order to escape and or get their friends out of danger. Meanwhile, Camlash still has that aforementioned teleport, and the battle can rage on in the remnants of the tower after the tower has fallen. But there's still another problem with the tower drop. Here we are with the opportunity to drop a tower upon a citadel down below, and yet our map only shows the citadel intact. I know the maps have been kind of lackluster in this adventure, but lacking the option for what this is going to look like after the fact is just a criminal fail. For shame, for shame! Fortunately, if I'm not mistaken, the incredible creators out in the community will swiftly remedy this with a shattered tower version of the citadel for us to put into our games so that we can show our players how awesome their actions up top and the challenges that have gone on have been or could be. In Y7, Miska's prison fight is very well designed, with an alternate victory condition baked in and an option for scaling the power level of Miska depending upon the group that you're dealing with without just dropping his whole stat block on the group. This has clearly been well thought out and has created some good opportunities. I know that my groups are going to need the scaled up version of Miska in order to feel challenged, but yours might vary, and the fact that they included that option was good thinking. The final change I would suggest in this chapter is at F2, where the use of Disguise Self breaks the rules for Disguise Self, not only being unable to change the size category of a creature, but its general number of limbs, which makes Disguise Self basically useless for the creature involved unless they want to appear like a giant crab. Instead, make the Raclupus invisible by the door and have his companions hide in crabbish form. If the crabs draw attention, he attacks. If he draws attention, the crabs attack. And if neither, well, then surprise your group and it should be interesting. In Chapter 11, in order to make transport to Vecna's grasp feel sensible, make sure that you are telling your group that they feel this strange connection to this distant place when they hear the name of the Cave of Shattered Reflections, as if the place was just a step away inside of their minds, and they could at any point take that step. I'd probably leave out the timely call back to Sigil and only offer further information to them if they return there to get a long rest while the Wizards 2 study. But there's still a couple of things in this chapter that need a little bit of tweaking. In K5, we're supposed to convince the Betrayer with a high DC or else nothing. He won't fight, so there's no consequences except that he won't willingly assist, but since he doesn't really resist either, who cares? It's a boring and bad fail state. Fighting them again since you've already defeated them might not be particularly interesting, sure, but it's still better than this. Give them an unarmed strike, which you can yoink straight from the new Strahd stat block, and have them unable to draw their sword while the group is trying to get a hold of it. And make this your fail state for your group failing to persuade them, or stumbling upon the answer that's going to cause them to hand over the blade willingly. Take away their legendary resistance, since Vecna certainly doesn't think that they are legendary, and add the same constraints as what Neverender is under in their section, that the sword can be touched by incapacitating or destroying them, though for the Betrayer, let them pick it up under those circumstances instead of adding the 0 hit point requirement. The problem we run into with the Astral Dreadnought in this chapter is that we tell the group that the items could be lost forever at the destruction of the creature, and yet the destruction of the creature leads to all of the junk appearing right next to them, easy for the group to go through and get their final reward. Admittedly, this takes care of the need for a fail state, but it's kind of narratively lame and not ideal. Though the Dreadnought's death is relatively unlikely, a better fail state might be the repeat of this sequence. The group reappearing at the beginning of the demiplane as it relives over and over Vecna's new version of events is an easy way to move forward from a bad set of choices. Expended resources are lost and the group needs to Groundhog Day their way towards a better future. Rewarding the group with the power of secrets is an awesome way to have tied together the things that they've learned and to narratively give them a little extra oomph in this final encounter. But when you give them these different boosts, probably needs a little bit of adjustment. Inspiration and the ability to see through the crystal walls should be given out as soon as they arrive at Area R1, but you should probably save the free haste effect for the group until they're in an encounter with Vecna. Also, as overpowered as it might feel, I would consider giving at least some of these abilities to Vecna also. After all, he's clearly got more secrets than they do. I probably wouldn't give him the haste since he's been there for a while, and perhaps he's encountered other upstarts that have caused a few problems. And I wouldn't bother with inspiration for an NPC, but seeing through walls and advantage on con saves are two mechanics that would really serve him well in the upcoming encounter, and will help to keep the mechanic feeling universal and tied together. The Cave of Shattered Reflections itself is an awesome map with some really fun and interesting bits and pieces to it. An interesting teleport door puzzle that builds a fun and intriguing battlefield for when Vecna is faced, and the other fights that take place there. The battle against Vecna couldn't be a more terrifying challenge than when he can teleport away through various walls and these portals become your quick and dirty way of chasing after him. Even if you're not letting him see through these walls and fell rebuke away through them, use the doors as often as possible to create the battle puzzle feel that this map has in potential. However, there are 2 rooms on this map that unfortunately are completely inaccessible with the way the map has been designed. Vecna could technically teleport into one of those rooms and then just be immune to everything because there's no way for you to reach him there. Whoops! Flip the red and blue sides of the crystal on either E1 or E2, but not both, to fix this little boo-boo. Vecna has a beast of a stat block, though it's not one of my favorites. I don't like the trend towards legendary reactions instead of legendary actions, and I think as written, this fight is going to be long and arduous for your groups. But it is the final encounter, so there's something to be said for that. He also feels very stabby for a spellcaster, but he will absolutely mess some groups up. As a final concern, the ending in the Astral Sea is both awesome and cinematic as a sort of scroll out point where you end the story, if of course this was a movie. But since it's not, it doesn't exactly scream the epic "we have won" that the group is looking for. Make sure you play on after this ending long enough for the group to make their way back to the Wizards 2 so that they can be appropriately rewarded and praised for their awesomeness. Speaking of awesomeness, you are awesome for watching this whole video. Thank you. If you've spotted anything that I've missed, make sure you leave it in the comments down below so that the rest of the community can find it when they're preparing for this epic adventure. If you haven't already watched the other portions of the DM's guide for Vecna, make sure you check those out. And otherwise, thanks so much for watching. Happy adventuring.